My name is Megan Locke, and I am the Animal Welfare Program's Communications and Media Assistant. I will be the host of today's podcast. Welcome to Macmillan 180. For nearly the past 25 years, students and faculty of the University of British Columbia's Animal Welfare Program have gathered here to share ideas, learn, and enjoy lunch. To celebrate our 25th anniversary, the Animal Welfare Program hosted a series of webinars to virtually invite our diverse alumni to join us once again around the table in room 180. On October 3rd, 2022, we were joined by Mitja, Amber, and Terri to discuss how to achieve change for animals in government organizations. Mitja Settelbauer obtained his master's from the AWP in 2006 after completing his Doctor of Veterinary Medicine in Slovenia. He now acts as a policy officer in the Animal Welfare Unit of the European Commission's Directorate General for Health and Food Safety. Currently, he is working on revising EU legislation on welfare regarding transporting animals and companion animals. Amber et al. Obtained her master's from the AWP in 2014 after completing her DVM at the University of Pennsylvania. She was appointed as Washington State Veterinarian in March and is currently the chair for the National Assembly of State Veterinarians Animal Welfare Committee. Terri Giacomazzi obtained her Bachelor of Science in Agriculture from UBC in 2001, having the opportunity to take many AWP-led courses. Terri has held several government roles over the past 21 years, and her role today is Team Lead of Livestock Industry Specialists with the BC Ministry of Agriculture and Food. We started off each webinar by asking our guests their favorite memory during their time at the AWP. Amber mentioned learning about the role of animals in art, which is one of Dr. David Fraser's specialties. In API 314, which is an undergraduate class named Animals and Society, Dr. Fraser taught about how the way animals were represented throughout history in art reflects societal views of animals at each point in time.
I think what struck me and what drew me to the animal welfare program was the way that animals in art were shown. And that's a David Fraser thing, which I later learned. But David, I wanted to thank you for that because I've never really before the program thought about how animals were viewed historically and how societal changes very much viewed animals differently, used animals differently, and kind of got us to where we are today. So I think my favorite memory is kind of thinking about how animals in art are so influential and tell such an amazing story.
Terri continues talking about another course, which is API 315, Animal Welfare and the Ethics of Animal Use. This was the first undergraduate course offered by faculty members at the Animal Welfare Program. In 2020, this course was presented with the Humane Society of United States Annual Award for Outstanding Contributions to the Teaching of Issues Relating to Animal Ethics and or Animal Production. When asked about the key lesson that she learned during her time at the AWP, she mentioned how the class taught her about how different people view and engage with animal welfare.
I remember David Fraser explaining about diversity of perspective and the different ways that people look at assessing animal welfare. And for me at that time, it was brand new information. I think that information has just been something that I've kept there, and it's helped me to think through difficult conversations, trying to understand where people are coming from when they, are engaging on animal welfare. So that's been hugely valuable for me.
Mitja said he couldn't choose just one key lesson, and instead talked about all the knowledge he learned in Macmillan Room 180, the Office of the Animal Welfare Program.
I also cannot point to a single thing that I would say, okay, this is what I learned. I think the sheer width of knowledge and information I was exposed to just by being there has changed me unbelievably. I have to stress again that 180 this is not only a place where you find out stuff that you need for your own research. It's a place where people coming from conferences all around the world talking about what they heard there. Basically, this is a guarantee to get immersed into what is going on in animal welfare. And this in itself has been something that has been following me all these years. The exchange of information.
We also wanted to know if there was animal welfare research that was making an impact in the governmental field. Mitja talked about how his own work during his time at the AWP came up in his policy work years later.
We talked about this with Amber and Terri when we first met before this webinar, how the research that's happening today will become relevant for the legislation in 20 years maybe. And just now when we are in Brussels working on, say, transport of animals and welfare of kept animals, we receive documents that are basically the impact assessment and scientific opinions from authorities that we get. And I found in there a paper that I am listed as a co-author. There's a paper there from Francis Flower on lameness, and research that I helped gave data that helped to create that paper as well. What I'm saying is that what you're doing definitely will have effects in, maybe next year, maybe in 25 years, but it will happen.
Amber agreed with the delayed impact of science, as well as brought up some challenges that arise when trying to connect industry, policy, and research in the United States.
Working as the state veterinarian, just seeing how delayed science is. How long ago was it since the papers were published on using some kind of pain mitigation for dehorning, and it's painful. Like here we are 20 years later, and there's still nothing that's mandated necessarily. I mean, there's some steps moving towards that. But I think that is a huge issue with trying to get the science and having that drive decision making. So I think one of the things we talked about before that came up that I think is just really challenging is that there was a day when we all believed that science was what we could all agree on. Now with social media, the drivers for change and for how policy is made is very different. So people come up with their own science. There may be no science, but they come up with their own opinion based on maybe their values or maybe an agenda, and it's harder to use science. I think there's a paradigm shift away from using science for decision making, which is very, very concerning. And there's also a delay in getting the science that we do and the practices that maybe we should be able to implement, getting them out there with the public where we're actually doing it. And one of the things that I see that's a huge problem is that our industries aren't engaging with that science, or veterinarians aren't taking that science to their producers. And so we have a very reactive model, at least in the United States, where we're reacting to initiatives rather than our industry stepping forward. And I know, David Fraser, you've talked about this, the idea of professionalism. I think there's still a big disconnect there, but I do want the students to know that the work you're doing, hopefully we can expedite the use of what you're doing.
The speakers also talked about opportunities to create change when working in government organizations. Our alumni go on to work all throughout the United States and Canada, Europe, Oceania, and South America. So we are grateful to have such a variety of perspectives and experiences shared with us today. Each of our speakers talked about opportunities to create change in the areas that they work in. Terri works in Canada with the BC Ministry of Agriculture and Food and notes how Canada has numerous collaborative opportunities at both the provincial and federal levels.
I mean, I think there's lots of opportunities, whether it be at the provincial government level or whether it be at the codes of practice level. I've seen so many opportunities around collaborative, inclusive processes. To me, I think there's so much collective wisdom to be harnessed when you bring a group of people together. Canada is quite unique in the process that we use in developing animal welfare policies, and particularly the codes, but also at the provincial government. I mean, it doesn't always work that way, but I've seen several processes that have worked very effectively by taking that collaborative approach. So I do think that that's a success and an opportunity going forward.
Amber works in the U.S. in the veterinary field and brings up how there are plenty of opportunities for change in the U.S. because of the current lack of animal welfare policy in the country.
Yeah, I would say, it's a lot different in the United States. Very challenging here. There's a lot of opportunities here to change things and change process. But at this point, I think what's really hard is, first of all, we have very little policy in place with regards to animal welfare, unless it's with lab animals or zoos. There's some federal oversight there. After that, there is zero interstate harmonization with regards to animal welfare. It's an opportunity, but it's a scary opportunity because it could go one way or the other. So what we see in the United States is, especially around farm animals, there is really nothing. I think it makes us very vulnerable Our industry is very vulnerable, that we sit back and we wait for someone to tell us what to do. In the United States, we have a lot of opportunities to change the way we do this. However, we have some industries that are extremely independent. It's just very interesting how most of our producers function in this silo. Trying to get that idea that Dr. Fraser introduced about professionalism into these industries was extremely challenging. But without being a profession and without being professionals, we're not being professionals. If we're not stepping forward and we're not setting what those standards should look like based on science, and we're allowing the public, for better or for worse, I think there's always good intentions with what's trying to be done. And often positive change comes even out of radical ideas that are put forward in a ballot because it makes us think again, why are we doing this? How do we help our industries be more proactive? And we could talk about this for a long time, but I think what I want to say, the opportunity in the United States is to look around and, get our heads out of the dark and start looking about how other countries are doing this.
Mitja works in the European Union, currently specializing in how to improve legislation for animals during transport. His depth of knowledge in international trade is highlighted in his response as he discusses the challenges of using science to counter long-standing societal beliefs when changing laws.
Yes, what Amber mentioned at the very end, the international trade. Yes, it is an opportunity, but it's also a problem-creating element, really, because we all know European Union as being, yes, pro-animal welfare, and it's rightfully so. But when it comes to protecting European farmers from the products from third countries, we run into issues with World Trade Organization because animal welfare is really not a part of the requirements. So the only reason European Union can get away with it is because we are number one buyers. We import, we buy from everywhere. So basically we have the leverage to basically demand the requirements from products coming from third countries. And indeed, if they do not meet the requirements that are equal as in Europe, then we just don't buy it there. We go elsewhere. There is always a question is how long this is going to go. So this is one both opportunity and challenge. Another challenge is making the change through legislative work. There are limits to this as well. And this is something I wanted to bring up in this discussion. You don't generally change the way people behave just by passing a law. I actually think that passing a law and writing a law should be a combination of numerous things that need to happen before that, so that we have a societal consensus that something needs to change. Of course, this all needs to be backed up with science. But believe it or not, there are parts of animal welfare where science does not count. I'm talking, of course, about religious slaughter. Science is of no use there. We can have thousands and thousands of paper saying how many seconds a cow needs to lose consciousness once its throat has been cut. But it will not help because there are scriptures that say that it needs to be alive and conscious when the throat is being cut. In Europe, there's more and more member states who have actually banned slaughter without stunning. But we never know when one of them will be hit by a court of justice or a European Court of Human Rights saying that, no, this cannot be done. So these are really just a few, but every day there are new challenges coming up and opportunities to look into.
Our audience was curious about how they can have their say to create change in government. Terri talked about how the public can make the most impact in Canada.
I can share a little bit about how it does work. And as a provincial government, we often receive concerns via letters from the general public raising concerns. And I do think that that's an effective way for people to raise concerns. Certainly all those concerns that are brought forward are carefully pondered and considered. And I will say that from a government perspective, animal welfare is constantly changing. So when I look back over, say, the last 20 years, I can identify several times over those years where our fundamental legislation, which is the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act, has been tweaked over the years. And certainly when people bring it to government attention, what some of their concerns are, it's helpful to hear what they might be, and that, that we can, like, as I said, carefully ponder and consider what some of those concerns are. So that's certainly one method, and I think that works well.
Finally, we ended the webinar by asking our speakers to share one special piece of advice that they would leave for current and future members of the AWP. Mitja had some words of wisdom to share about pursuing what you're passionate about.
Go out there, find your place, and then work on it. I mean, if you have planned that you want to be a scientist and work in academia, fine. If not, find something vaguely interesting for you and develop it.
And Amber encourages us to push ourselves outside of our comfort zone.
Be a lifelong learner. Don't stop where you are. Keep pushing the limit. Think of that as an opportunity to push yourself, not just in your yellow zone, be in your red zone and like it there, because that's where you're going to learn the most.
Thank you for listening to our October podcast on achieving change for animals in government organizations. You can find the Animal Welfare Program on our website at www.awp.landfood.ubc.ca and on our Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter social media channels. Join us next time for an episode on achieving change in veterinary practice.